Well, welcome to the Sean Trey Show. I got a really interesting and awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Rolando, and I am married to my beautiful wife, Lisa. I have two children of my own,
That's
and my
awesome.
wife also comes along with her. So we're a little bit of a Brady Bunch at my home. We've been married for about 12 years, and we also have an opportunity or the privilege of pastoring our church that started 10 years ago. We literally just celebrated our 10-year anniversary this weekend.
That's
And
awesome.
we live in Staten Island, New York, and we pastor. Our church is called Christ Uncensored House of Worship. We also have an online ministry, an online platform, and I'm just glad to be here, man. Thank you so much,
That's
Sean.
awesome. It's awesome. I found you in a kind of a roundabout way. I was actually looking at I love martial arts, and you popped up on a jujitsu page. I think you were getting a promotion or something, and it was like, and then they tagged you, and they were like, this is one of the most awesome, deserving people ever." And I clicked on the link, and I was like, if someone recommends someone like that, I want to see what this person's all about. And so I went to your page, and I saw kind of what you were posting on your Instagram, and I was really inspired to want to reach out because I was on the day that the day that I saw your page, I was having a tough day. I was having
Mm,
a hard time, and you had this message like, "Hey, if you're watching this right now, this is for you." And it was just like, wow, right place, right time, and I just felt like there was something I wanted to talk to you to hear about. You are using. I grew up, going to church and having just a really conventional religious upbringing, right? And now to see someone that's utilizing social media to reach out to people's hearts and souls, it's just interesting. And I'd love to hear, how did you get started down this path, man?
yeah. Well, are you talking about the social media path or the
Social.
Brazilian
Let's
Jiu-Jitsu?
right. I that was loaded there. Let's start off with your ministry. How did you get started in your ministry?
Okay, sure. So in terms of ministry, in terms of church, I was 17 years old and I was going to a youth group. Long story short, and in that youth group, I had an encounter with Jesus, and I remember just being there and kind of hearing or feeling or internalizing this expression. This it felt like an inner voice within me that said, there will be people that don't hear my message because you're not preaching it." And for whatever reason, that really just, I want to say, is what I call these burning bush moments. Is when just God calls you, and it felt like the Lord was kind of talking to me in a language that I needed to hear at that moment. It was like, "Hey, there's people that won't hear my message because you're not preaching it." And I just felt like it was God's way of telling me that there's a unique people that He's called me to speak into, to share His message in a way that maybe only I can share it. And so that was something that was etched in my heart. And from that day forth, I gave my life to the Lord. And maybe then that very next year, I signed up for Bible Institute at the church that I was a part of. And the youth pastor put me into the preaching ministry. And so I started giving devotionals and preachings at 18 years old. Um, And so I continued throughout my years of ministry. I did music for a while, maybe did about 10 years of music, hip hop as a rapper. And then in 2012, we were in our living room. I had a group of people that I loved, and we just kind of had this impression that it was time to begin a church. And, we had covering and we had support from my pastor at the time. And we launched out as a church in 2012. I should say we started in our living room. And in 2013, we launched out as a church. And so that was the beginning of our church ministry. And so, like I said, we just celebrated 10 years, and it's been one heck of a journey in Staten Island, New York. For the most part, out of the 10 years, 7 of those years, we've been at 4 p.m. service, and that's an evening time in Staten Island. So for us, that was something, that was challenging for us at Staten Island. But I remember the Holy Spirit was letting me know this is where you're going to grow your church at 4 p.m., which is practically impossible in Staten Island. Prime time is 11 a.m. and if you're not done by 12:30, I mean, people are leaving. And so the Lord gave us a unique voice to reach the people at 4 p.m. And I remember when we started our ministry, we were a little bit of a younger crowd in Staten Island. And pastors came to me and they said, "Hey, man, we appreciate what you're doing, but that doesn't work here." I just remember God
Mm.
just nudging me and saying, "What I've called you to do is to build the church of the future." I didn't know what that meant. But when I look at our church now, what I see is those parents that had the 10-year-old kid, the 12-year-old kid that were raised in our kids' ministry are now the kids that are 20 years old and are leading our ministry. So it didn't make sense then, but it sure makes sense now. And so that's part of the history of our church. And then during the pandemic is really when the Lord opened the door for online ministry. I think online ministry is just an extension of who you are. So my social media has always been an extension of who I am, and I feel like at the core of who I am, I've always been someone um, that has wanted to communicate. That no matter what's in my heart, I want to communicate it, whether it's been good or bad. Always been a communicator. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, everything was shut down, everything was closed, church was online, and the Lord kind of impressed it in my heart to jump back on social media. Oh, let me backtrack real quick. Let
Okay.
me
Okay.
backtrack. 2000 and 2018, and I have this on
Okay.
on YouTube. By the way, there's a long video explanation of just how this happened. In 2018, I felt like the Lord was nudging me towards social media, but to really put a focus and an emphasis on social media. And that's what I did. And so that platform grew on social media on Instagram. It grew to maybe I had maybe like 300 followers, and it went from 300 followers within a year to about 15 to 16,000 followers on Instagram. This was 2018. Well, 2019, I go through a 21-day fast. And in that fast, the Lord tells me, "Hey, I want you to get off social media completely." I was already off social media because when I start off the year, I kind of get off social media. I'm going to do it this year as well. In January, I get off social media. And he says, "Hey, I want you to remain off social media." And I'm like, "How long?" He's like, "For a year." This is 2019. And I said, "But I've worked so hard. I worked so hard building this platform that I now have with 16,000 followers." He's like, "I want you to get off social media." And so, um, very, very filled with agony and pain, I did so. And for an entire year, I went off social media. Now, fast forward 2020, I start going back on social media as a user, but not as a content creator, not as anything like that. And so then it was around May that I felt like the Lord was impressing me to start a TikTok. Just out, kind of like in a playful, like, I'm just gonna go on TikTok, and I'm just gonna maybe do like a verse of the day or maybe share something. Again, social media has always been an extension of what I am or who I am. And I even told my wife, I was like, "You think I should get on TikTok?" She's like, I don't know. And TikTok was kind of like on the rise at that time. And so I went on TikTok, and maybe about the third or fourth video went viral. And once that third or fourth video went viral, the account shot up to maybe 100,000 followers. This is in that first year. By the end of that year, it was maybe about 250,000 followers. So it wasn't really a crazy journey. That when the Lord told me to get off social media, oh, I remember I said to him, I said, "Lord, I've worked so hard to do this." He goes, "Yeah, that's what you've been able to do in your power. I'm going to show you what I can do with my power."
Mm.
So a whole year, and then 2020, the third or fourth video goes viral. TikTok goes up to 250,000 followers the first year, and God started using that platform for ministry. Then that began to transfer on Instagram with the reels, and God then took that from the 16,000 followers that were there to over 100,000 followers on YouTube. By the grace of God, again, went from 500 subscribers to 500,000 subscribers. On Facebook, I went from 5,000 followers to 150,000 followers on two accounts. One was my personal account and one was my ministry account, but they both grew to over 150,000 followers. And so the Lord began to use this online platform. And the message that He gave me was to share the message of my love. And so the content that I put out is really getting God's love out there everywhere. There's a passage in the letters of John where he says, "No one has ever seen God." And it's a fascinating passage. He says, "No one has ever seen God." But, and you would think like what's coming after that will be something along the lines, but here's what you need to do to see God. He contrasts the fact that no one has ever seen God with, but if they see your love.
Mm.
So there's an implication there is, which kind of alludes back to John chapter 13:35. He says, "This is the way the world will know that you are my disciples, by the way you love one another."
Yeah.
So there's this thought like, yeah, no one has ever seen God, but if they can see your love. John also writes, to trust in God, to trust in God's love is to trust in God, for God is love.
Yeah.
So the thought there is that if people can see the quality of love that you possess, they will ultimately ask about it and see the God that you serve. So that's been the journey,
I
Sean.
love that. I love that. One of the things I grew up I went to Christian school, and it was a lot of dogma, a lot of this, and I'm not hating on it. And I just would get these
Right,
discussions with
right,
my
right.
dad, and I would say, you know, I don't have those answers. I am not the person to answer the questions of interpreting, you know, uh, all of this. But I'd say to my dad, but I know one thing is it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to live my life showing people, love, showing people kindness, showing people service, showing people this path of something higher, something better. Because for me,
Mm,
I try to walk the walk. I absolutely loved back in the day. What would Jesus do? That was my favorite movement for a long time, because you know this idea of, let's get rid of all this and just sit down and think about how would how would Jesus act in this situation? How
right.
would this situation be different? How would I be different? Because I was driving today and I saw, what was it? Someone was wearing a T-shirt and it said something like "kindness is everywhere" or "sow seeds
Mm,
of kindness." And it was just like,
mm.
wow, that was beautiful. And that same person then 2 seconds later cut me off in traffic, and I was just like, and I was just like, hang on, but
That's why we don't have church bumper stickers at our church. That's
right,
why we don't have.
right, man. You know what? It just made me realize that you might not have all those answers, and you might never find some of the answers that you're looking for, but that doesn't stop you from living a life full of love and sharing that love and inspiring
Mm,
others to carry that as well.
mm. So good. Yeah, I absolutely resonate with that. Though, being raised in a church as well, where there was a lot of dogma preached, and oftentimes what is shared and preached is the traditions that are passed
Yeah.
down to us. And with that being said, I mean, sometimes I think it's good, well-meaning people
Yep.
that they have maybe the right intentions, but unfortunately are ignorant of some things or misinformed. It reminds me of a story um, that has a lot of nuggets in it, and it's just about a daughter that was asking her mom why she cut the two ends of the ham. I don't know if you ever heard that story, but
No.
it was essentially a mom that's making the family meal, and she has a
Yeah.
all her family coming over, and she's making her traditional family recipe, and she cuts the ham right before she puts the ham inside. She puts that ham inside the oven. She cuts the two ends of the ham. Well, curious daughter says, "How come you cut the two ends of the ham?" She says, "I'm not really sure, but that's the way I was taught. I think it's to help absorb some of the juices, but I really don't know why. Um, Grandma should know." So the curious daughter, she calls grandma. She's like, "Grandma, mom told me that you taught her how to make this famous family recipe that's been passed down throughout generations." She cuts the two ends of the ham. And the grandma says, "Yeah, that's exactly how we do it. We cut the two ends of the ham and we put it inside the oven. But I also don't know why it is. I think it's to absorb all the juices, but I'm not sure. You know what? My mom is the one that taught me, and I just followed her recipe." Well, she goes and calls great grandma, right?
Yeah.
Great grandma says, she goes, "Great grandma, grandma and mom told me that you taught them how to make this amazing ham, but you cut the two ends out. Is it true that you do it so that the juices will be absorbed?" She goes, "No, I just never had a big enough pan for the ham. And so I used to cut off the two ends." And so it kind of goes to show, like, sometimes we're just doing things over and over because that's the way we were taught. And sometimes we got
Yeah.
to be like that curious daughter that says, "Hey, how come we are doing this? Why is
Yeah.
it that we're doing this?" And us as a church community, and even some of the things that it's okay to wrestle with these things. Sometimes
Yeah.
we kind of push our agenda and want people to accept it at face value. And what I think that we've done, even as a church and even in our online ministry, is we want people to be curious. We want people to have their questions. We want people to wrestle with whatever they're wrestling with. But we also want to make sure we're giving them what the recipe actually is. So I go back to Jesus. I go back to his life. I go back to the things that he said. I
Yeah.
go back to his reflection of the Father, and you'll be surprised how a lot of, I want to say it this way, and I don't mean to be, bashy in any way of the church, because I love the church at large. I love the church. I love the body of Christ. But I think that sometimes we need to divorce ourselves from churchianity and realize that being a follower of Jesus and a lover of Jesus and being led by Jesus may look different than what we've been taught in churchianity throughout the
Yeah.
years, through traditions. And so it's good to question, hey, how come we do this? Why is it that we do this? Is this part of our faith, or is this just a method? And it's good to even distinguish, right? So even as our church, we have methods, but our method is not the message, and we're not
Yeah.
married to the method, right? And sometimes religion can just be us being married to a method and sometimes
Yeah.
overlooking the message.
I love that. I love that because there's one thing that popped into my head when you were saying that. Um, People can do things a certain way again and again and again, but it doesn't necessarily mean a that they're doing it the right way or that there even is a right way.
Mm,
It's along the lines of finding your journey, and
yeah.
finding out the what works for your community, what works in your space. There was this great story that I heard a long time ago about these three guys that were on this island. A fake story, right? But it still illustrates a great point. And they were, doing these miracles. So the church sent out this priest to study what these guys were doing. That they were doing these amazing miracles. And the guy gets there, he's got all the robes, he's all dressed up, and these guys are like, they're like, "What are you doing here? We got a visitor. This is amazing. You're so formal." And he's like, "Well, I'm here to teach you the right way to do things because you're doing these miracles, and if you have the right tools, then what you guys can do then is amazing." And so
Mm,
he tells them this, he teaches them these formal things, and then he's like, my work is done. I will now go back to where I was at and do what I was doing. So he goes back on the boat. He's, rather rowing back to shore. These guys are on this island. And suddenly he sees this dot of light dancing across the water. And he's like, what is that? What is this? He sees these guys and they're all running towards him across the water, holding hands. And they get to the boat and they jump in the boat. And they're like, what were those prayers again? We totally forget. We can't remember. Can you tell us? Can you teach that stuff again? And we forget that some of the most simple things are. My friend's father is a pastor, and he was a pastor. He when he was young, was in the Cambodian killing fields, and he was living in Cambodia during the reign of Pol Pot. Pol Pot came in, killed millions of his own people.
Wow.
Cambodia, they had a rule during the Khmer Rouge regime: glasses and watch. If you had glasses and watch or a watch, they'd kill you, because that was the thing they did. When my friend's father heard the gospel, he had half a Bible. He and his friend, they split it. He took one half, got the New Testament, and his friend got the Old Testament. And they tore it in half, and he kept it. And it was one of the things that he read, and gave him faith, gave him hope. And he didn't have anyone to explain things to them. There was no one to tell him what this meant, how it should be interpreted, how to believe. But in the darkest of days, when people were getting hauled off and tortured and killed, he found his hope and faith in the
Mm.
simple messages that he read. He found hope in um, in the stories of Christ, in the stories of this man who came to earth, and the Son of God who came to earth, and led this life of service, led this life of healing, led this life of hope. And that story kept him going. It gave him hope. And when he was able to leave, eventually he moved to the U.S. and they were able to, and he went to the seminary and he learned so much. And he'll always say that his faith is the same faith that he had at the beginning. The
Mm.
stories did not get more complex. He learned more. He learned how to work with people more. He learned how to minister to people. But his faith was strongest in those moments where it was simplest. And just
Wow.
something that popped up.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the message of God's love has unfortunately been overcomplicated, and this is something that the Apostle Paul actually got really indignant about when the message of God's love got overcomplicated. And this is something we actually shared with our church recently. It's like, hey, let's keep the message simple, because the message is simple. If we believe so strongly in the message that we share, then let the message do the work. The Bible says that the gospel, which is the message that we've been entrusted in the original language, is this word, not to get all deep, but it's this word called euangelion. And the word is actually seldomly used in ancient Greek literature, because it means, it was a superfluous, kind of like a hyperbolic word that describes something so outstanding, something so amazing, because uh, kind of like it was like the nearly too good to be true news. It was it was almost like hard to believe when you said something was euangelion. When you had euangelion, you were talking about something that was nearly too good to be true. And
Yeah.
so this gospel message is literally the word that is used over and over to express the message of God's love. That word, euangelion. So we've overcomplicated this original meaning of God's message, which is, again, the message of God's love. And it's a 3-point message: that Jesus Christ died for our sins, that he rose again on the third day, and then he appears to us. And that is the message of the gospel. There's other things that unfortunately have been added to this message, but this is the message that Paul says is the power of God. It's not the power of
Yeah.
man. It's not the power of religion. It's not the power of our self help. It's not the power of um, how much we read the Bible or how much we pray or our works. The gospel is the power of God that brings salvation unto those who believe in it. And so for me, I want to keep it simple. Let's keep that simple. Let's keep the message of God's love simple, because the moment we begin to add our own persuasion, like you said about the church gentleman that he came and says, "Let me show you how to do it right." I'm saying no. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it to the original. And yeah, that's really where Paul gets indignant, because unfortunately, people started adding to the message in those times, even in those times. And he says,
Mhm.
he goes, he actually gets so indignant. Is the only time he ever calls somebody a name, and he says, "You foolish Galatians." He goes, "Who has bewitched you?" He goes, "You've let another come and share with you a different gospel. You've believed in a different
Mhm.
gospel." And essentially, the gospel that they were believing in is that it was Jesus plus something else. It was Jesus Christ died, was crucified, was resurrected, but you also need to be circumcised. But you also need to have sacrifices. But you also need to. And he was like, "No, that's a different gospel." Sometimes we kind of do that in our modern day context, where we add our own 2 cents to those things. And
Yeah.
hey, let's keep our faith simple.
One of the things that popped up early on too that you were talking about is like sometimes I think that, and I don't want to bash anyone. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Sometimes not all Christians are very Christ-like, and I
Mm,
think that we have to come back to the idea of at the fundamental core of what Christ was love. It was
mm,
this embodiment of divine love.
right.
And you look about that, about how this man lived, how Christ lived, this
Yeah.
coming down and feeding the sick, caring for the sick, healing the sick, feeding the homeless, caring for people that were, abandoned by society. You look at the lepers. These were people who were cast away from society, who were just left to kind of, you guys got to go to your camps, and you go to these places and don't come near the rest of civilization because you will contaminate people. And they were cast away, and Christ would go into these communities and be like, start healing people, and you look at just all of these different stories throughout the Bible of of service, of selfless acts, and how much that is needed in this day and time, how much it is needed for people to cast aside all that they think they know and to say, you know what, we have these people right here, whatever group that is, whatever labels they have, whoever they are. If these people are hurting and suffering, do something to help. That could be your neighbor who's having a bad day. That could be a refugee community. That could be whatever it is. Are there people that are hurting and suffering? Are there people that need help? And can you do something? Because if you can, and the answer should be 99.9% yes, you can, then do it. Don't just
Yeah.
look. Don't just offer pity. Stop just, hopes and prayers.
Yeah.
Prayer is important, but action. If you can do something, do
Yeah.
it, because that was Christ was a man of action. This was,
Mm,
this was not like, let's just sit here. It was like, let's get our hands dirty. You know, we need to feed these people. Let's feed them. We need to
yeah.
help these people. We will help them. You know, action, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's something that James talks about. He says, don't offer prayer when you can offer help, essentially. In another translation, it's like, don't offer prayer when you can offer help. And sometimes it's like you have the means to help someone and you say, hey, I'll pray for you. You say, hey, man, if you have money in your pocket right there and you can help them, go ahead and do it that way. And that's what we see in the life of Jesus, that he was someone that he cared so much. The number one attribute that you see of Jesus in his living, in his ministry here on earth, is compassion. And he felt compassion and he experienced compassion. And it was for the people. There was one time that he's being questioned because he's hanging out with so many people that at that time were seen as the outcasts, as the sinners, as the marginalized. And he's asked, why is it that you do that? Like, why is it that you're hanging out? Because it wasn't just like Jesus was just in ministry mode. He was actually spending time with these people. He was eating at their house. And eating at someone's house is not like, our New York minute, at least over here in this part of the world, where it's just like, hey, we come over. No, eating over someone's house at that time was like Thanksgiving. This
Yeah.
was an entire evening. This was an entire preparation. When someone came over, it wasn't just, oh, dinner, just come hang out for a couple hours and then you go. No, this was an experience, and this was what Jesus was known for. So much so that when he was questioned, he says, "Why is it that you eat with sinners? Why is it that?" And then he goes on to tell these three stories that essentially illustrate the same point. He talks about a shepherd that lost a sheep. He talks about a woman that lost a coin and a father
Yeah.
who had his son leave. And he's like telling this story as a
Yeah.
response to why he hangs out with people that other people don't like. And it's the message that he's saying is like, because I love them, because
Hmm.
I'm like a shepherd that has lost his sheep. I am like a woman who lost money. I am like a father who has lost his son. And going back to, something that you said about being Christ-like, you know, we are that reflection as followers of Jesus. You know, we for those that are followers of Jesus, we pick up that image of Jesus here on earth. Jesus said something really profound and powerful. He goes, in my name you do greater things than I have. And
Yeah.
that's a powerful statement. So our reflection of God is the one that Jesus was here on earth. And so I remember there was one time where I left my son with my younger brother at the time, and my son was about 8 years old. And it was maybe for about 3 or 4 minutes, Sean. And I go back to my brother, and he has no clue where my son is.
Oh
And he
my
goes, I don't
goodness.
know. I don't know what happened. Well, I kind of flip out into I gotta find my son mode. Now we're in the middle of a mall. So everything starts going through my mind. My son is 18 now, he could get lost, that's fine. But at that time, this is 10 years ago, he was 8 years old. And I'm walking through the corridors of the mall, and I'm yelling his name and I'm calling out for him. And as I'm yelling his name and I'm calling out for him and I'm saying, his name is Bishop. I said, Bishop, and I'm yelling and I went into full pastor mode. I started recruiting people. I said, hey man, I need you to find my son. He's wearing this. He's wearing this top. He's wearing this bottom. I need you to help me find him. Close the doors of the mall. We need to find this kid. We need to get on mission. Well, as I continue to yell his name, I see my son eventually run to me. And I see him from a distance and he's running to me. So he kind of got wind. Well, later on, I asked him, I said, Pa, what did you like? What happened? Like you heard me yelling your name? He goes, no, I never heard you yelling your name. I went to a kiosk operator and the kiosk operator said to me, hey, I hear someone calling Bishop. Are you Bishop? And he goes, yeah. He goes, your father's looking for you. And so when the kiosk operator heard me, he told my son, and then my son was able to run to me. And I always looked at that as a perfect picture of what a follower of Jesus looks like. That there will be people in our lives that they may have to hear the voice of God through us,
Yep.
before they hear the voice of God for themselves. Like my
I
son
love that.
didn't hear my voice. It was the kiosk operator. The kiosk operator heard my voice. And then he shared that with my son. And then my son was finally able to hear my voice for himself. I think that we play the role of the kiosk operator oftentimes, that we are the ones that are the voice of God. And I just want to be a proper representative of what the voice of God looks like. And you don't need to look anywhere else than the life of Jesus to echo the things he said, how he communicated to the audience he communicated. I always find it interesting how sometimes we use the language that Jesus communicated with the Pharisees with the wrong audience. Do you understand? You follow what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah. Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
certain things, there's a certain language that he used with the Pharisees that he never once used with the sinners. And so often we kind of mix that language, but if we're truly modeling his voice, sometimes God has called us to be that kiosk operator, to be the voice that people hear at first so that they can eventually hear from themselves.
I I love that. There were there's a couple times that I've always been the person where I feel if I feel called to action, I act. If I feel like I'm
Mm,
supposed to be doing something, I do it. I remember once I was near my mom's house and all of a sudden I heard someone shouting, "Help, help." I just heard shouts. And my mom looked at me and she's like, "Don't go. Don't get involved." And
mm,
I looked at her and I said, "I have to." And
mm.
so I ran and I ran around the corner and it was nothing too serious. Sounds all mysterious, but someone had a bee that flew straight up in their ear. And
Uh,
at that moment, I had some medical training. Like, I studied medicine for a couple years before I dropped out of med school. And I was like, well, I know, got to pull the ear down this way, be able to get in there. Someone had some, I was like, I need some tweezers. And I just pulled the bee out. And
wow,
it was huge. It was a bumblebee, man. It was a big old bee. And it was like, and it was deeply wedged in there. And the lady was like, after I pulled it out, she's like, I have a bee allergy. And I was just like, we got that out without, if we had have left it in there, it would have stung
wow,
her eventually because it was freaked out. She was
wow.
freaking out. And,
Yeah.
right at that moment, I was just like, well, it's out. It's right here. She looked at it and she started weeping and then my daughter was over with my mom. So I had to run back over there. And my mom the next day said that this lady was walking around because I had to, I had to go, I had stuff that I had to do. And I came, helped, and then left. And the lady had told, she's like, I think there was an angel here yesterday. And,
Wow.
and it's like to be able to be that person at that moment to help and to be able to feel that call, feel that pull. It's another time that I was driving home and I just felt inspired to go a different way. I felt this pull like a string was pulling me. So I drove this other way. And as I'm driving down that road, I see that in the river off to the side of the road, a car had overturned, and it was just in there. There were other people starting to pull over, but I pulled over real quick, and it was interesting because at that moment, everyone was staring at the car. They're just staring at the car sinking, and everyone's standing around looking at it. And I said, "Is someone inside?" They're like, "Yeah, no one got out yet." So I ran down and I was like, "Someone give me something to break this." And a guy tossed me a golf club, hit the window. Window broke open, car started singing faster. Shoved my hand in, felt a hand grab mine, and I'm not a big
Wow.
guy, but in that moment, I just I pulled the person out as like just yanked this person out, and
Wow.
and again, it was just like, and then I had to, I was late for work, so I headed out to work. And years later, I had this message from this guy on Facebook saying, "Hey, are you that Sean Trace that once pulled this guy out of a car?" I was like, "Yeah, it was me, man. Just happened to be in the right place at the right
Wow.
time." And I said, "It's nothing. It's not that big of a deal." And the guy's like,
Yeah.
"It is. It is a big deal." And I was like, "Why? What do you mean, man?" And he's like, "That guy was me." And he's like, "You pulled me out of that car that day."
Wow.
And I don't see myself as special, but I see that any of us can be special if we listen. If we
Mm.
listen to that still small voice that calls us. What was it? Who was it that was it Elijah or Elisha that there was a small child that was getting called at night in the temple, and then finally, he said, you got to stop. You hear God was calling at night, and finally he went to his teacher and he's like, I feel like God's calling me. He's like, then ask and
Yeah,
answer.
Samuel.
Samuel. So I told how
Yeah.
did that story go, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just like that. That was
He
it.
got
It
called.
came
He's
to
like,
him 3 times. God started speaking to him. He couldn't recognize the voice. He thought it was his mentor. And comes to him. He says, "Hey, next time that you hear his voice," he goes, "Say, 'Here I am, Lord. I'm listening.'"
yeah,
Yeah, so
that's where
powerful.
it's at. It's where it's at, man.
Yeah,
We go through life with our missions, with our ideas, with our goals, with our visions, and those are great things. It's great to have them. It's great to have a purpose. But we have to be open to listening, be open to being in the right place at the right time and listening to God's lead. I remember once my wife had this woman who was this absolute um, icon. My wife's a famous singer in Vietnam, and she had
wow.
this one icon growing up, named Can Lei, and who's like, this lady's the lady. She sang all of the music in the 60s and 70s and early 80s and was like probably one of the most iconic Vietnamese vocalists of all time. And we were going through a tough patch, and I said, you know what, I feel inspired that you need to go to the Vietnamese Notre Dame Cathedral. There's this beautiful statue of Mary out in front, and it's this place that people go to pray. Lots of people go to pray. And I said that to her, and we kind of forgot. And months passed. I think it was 6 months. And finally, one day, she looked at me. She's like, "I'd like to go to the church and pray today." I said, "Right, let's do it." And we got there, and we're standing there praying, and we look over, and right next to us is Kanli, this lady. And my wife looks at her, and she's just like, "Oh my goodness, like that's my idol." And the lady recognized my wife, and they said hi to each other. And my wife said, "I've always, you've always been someone that I've absolutely admired and looked up to." And then she then looked at my wife and she says, "I've followed your story. I've followed your music. I've followed what you stood for. I see how you use your media to witness to people. I see the light that you shine in this world, and you inspire me." And my wife was just like, wow, just blown away. That still small voice, you know, are you able to listen
So
to God's
powerful.
call?
So powerful. That's great. That's great. And the beautiful thing is, Sean, is that he doesn't just speak once. He'll
No,
continue to speak until you hear him.
right?
That's the beauty of it.
If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, younger version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
It's funny that you're asking that because I'm working on a message called um, I'm working on this message called "A Letter to the Future You." A letter to the future you. And so, if I could, I've actually asked this question to myself before, and I think that there's two things that would be the first things that I would share with a younger version of myself. And the first thing would I would share is the message of God's grace in the way I understand it now. In the beginning, you know, I was a very young, zealous for the Lord kind of kid. And it was very, very much work based. It was very,
Mm,
very much, I wanted to prove something. I wanted to achieve something. So I had a lot of zeal for the Lord, a lot of passion for God, but it was motivated by the wrong thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that the first thing that I would introduce to myself as a younger version would be that God loves me no matter what.
I love that.
No matter how many sins I commit, no matter how many good works I do, that God, my relationship with God is based more about how much He loves me than how much I could ever love Him. And I think as a young man, I experienced God's love, and then somehow in my mind, I twisted the message to be, okay, now I got to love for Him. Now I got to run for Him. Now I got to do this for Him. And it just became motivated with this idea of wanting to pay Him back, wanting to um, kind of like, hey, here, are you proud of me, God? Like I'm doing the right thing. And um, I spent maybe about 10 years just struggling in religion and in work-based salvation and in zeal, and it wasn't grounded on the love of God. So that may sound simple in many ways, but it's very profound for me because of how that changed my life. In 2013, when we launched our church, I went through a 40-day fast, and I ended up losing like 40 something pounds. But in that 40-day fast, I participated in the 40-day fast because someone came to me and they said, "Hey, you're going to have a huge ministry. Millions are going to see you. Millions are going to be reached by you. Uh, but God is calling you to a 40-day fast." When they said that to me, I thought it was because of my religious duty. I thought it was because of my religious resume. Because I've
Mm.
been, I mean, I pray, I preach. I mean, what else is left other than a 40-day fast? you know, what is the next thing for me to achieve? And that 40-day fast, that is where I encountered the grace of God. It was in that 40-day fast. So it was weird, oddly enough, that God used even something like that to bring me to the end of myself. Because in that 40-day fast, I simultaneously saw that I was polished on the outside, but I was really corrupt on the inside. My heart was motivated by the wrong thing. And God was still saying, but I still love you like that.
Yeah.
I still love you like that. Like you hide that part of you so much because you're afraid that I won't love you. You're afraid of what I would think about you. But I know that about you. Like you don't have to hide it. You don't have to be insincere. I know that about you and I still love you. And so if I can go back in time, Sean, I think I would share with me a younger version of me. And then I think the the next thing would be just emotional health and healing. The priority of emotional health and healing. You know, just allowing allowing my heart to heal before it hurts myself or others. I didn't understand emotional health the way I do now, and I think that I
Yeah.
would go back to help me heal a little bit earlier in my stage.
I
So
love
yeah,
that,
those
man.
those two things. Yeah, the love of God, the way I understand it now, because I understood the love of God, but it was very surface. Um, so for me, that's called grace. I would share the message of grace with myself in a way in the way I understand it now, and then I would talk to myself about emotional health and healing. And there
I
was a
love
lot of
that.
there was a lot of things that my heart went through that I didn't allow myself to process or heal from. And it was not until my second marriage where I ended up in a very, very dark place. And it was there where I started discovering emotional health and healing. And it took me 5 years of counseling, but it ultimately led me to a place of healing. And I'm still healing, and I think we're all still healing, but yeah, there was a lot of my heart that needed to be healed before moving on. So I would go back to help me heal a lot sooner.
I love that, man. Well, I just want to appreciate. We didn't even touch on jujitsu. I'd love to have you back on sometime, and we can talk jujitsu. But man, that was deep. Um,
Do you do any martial arts, or have you done any
yeah, man.
martial arts?
I trained a long time. I have a black belt in Japanese style jujitsu, which is like more like judo. And so,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then I studied Muay Thai and I studied BJJ a little bit with some great guys down in LA. And yeah, man, I'm a journeyman of martial arts over like 20 years, you know. So I love it. I love,
Phenomenal.
I absolutely love um, how martial arts breaks you down and lets you see who you are. You know,
Yeah,
it just
yeah,
it pulls away all of those, all the things you think you know about yourself and shows you who you are.
yeah. I often get asked about jiu-jitsu in terms of the unarmed combat aspect of it, because sometimes it's assumed that it's a violent situation or violent sport or a violent practice. And I often say, even to the men, I'm like, no, actually, this actually makes you less violent because you're aware of what you can do. You're aware of your capabilities, because you, number one, a lot of times that when you see the violence that takes place in the street is someone that's overestimated their skills and underestimated the skills of others. When you actually do it, you understand the skills you have because you're getting beat up every day.
Yep.
And you kind of like you kind of understand that in the street world that there's other variables that are not in practice, and so you actually become less violent. And just the practice
Yeah.
itself on your body, it makes you a lot more composed, a lot more peaceful, a lot more tranquil. So yeah, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is something I've been practicing for about 4 years. My son has been doing it for almost 2 years. He's amazing at it, and it has so many components to it. So you're doing the cardio, you're doing the physical
Yeah.
strength, even from a mental aspect. You're there trying to solve a situation. You're put in a predicament that you're trying to get out of or get into a better position. And in many ways, that has been such a blessing to me. I always prescribe to anybody that's dealing with some kind of mental health, because of the content that I put out there. A lot of people reach out to me that struggle in the mental health area, and I think one of the number one things that have to be part of getting healthy in terms of your mind is physical activity. And what I recommend for physical activity is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I mean, I think it was Mark Zuckerberg that said that the reason that he's doing MMA now and he's doing BJJ and he's doing Muay Thai is because that even when he was going jogging or he was at the gym, he was still thinking about
Yes.
the workplace. He was still
Yep.
thinking about those things. He says when you're there in the gym and someone's on top of you trying to trying to put you in a submission, trust me, you're not thinking about the bills. You're not thinking about the
No.
company. You're thinking about how do I get out of this position? And it's so true. So it's very cerebral in that aspect. You have to think about it. You have to think about how to get out of this move in a way that is technical, not just blasting out of these situations, but in a way that's technical. So yeah, this is something I always recommend to those that are struggling with mental health. Hey, how can we get you into a gym? It is absolutely a priority that you ought to make. Tony Robbins calls it your musts. This has to be
Yep.
a must in your
Yep.
life. And so for me, it's become a must. It's because, and as a pastor, sometimes, you can put those things to the wayside and just make them secondary and make them even non important. And for me, I've just decided that when it comes to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I'm going to make it one of my musts because it covers so many aspects that are beneficial in my life.
Yeah.
Um, I'm 41 years old, and I want to stay healthy. I want to stay active. And when you got a 25-year-old, that's, like testosterone to the gills, it keeps you strong. It keeps you sharp. And so it's been such a blessing to me. And I also have a very unique bond with my son because of it. And so my son and I, we he serves at our church, and then we get to do this as well. So we get to do life together. We get to do ministry together. We get to do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu together, and it's been a heck of a journey.